In this video, we will be discussing the top screw-ups on a battlefield that accidentally helped win the war. Life is full of mistakes that wind up working out in the end, but where you usually don't find mistakes is on the battlefield, where brilliant commanders will use the slightest misstep against their opponent. In war, you do it right or you die. However, sometimes even in war, a little stupidity can work to one's advantage. Number 4. Unread messages about Pearl Harbor attack saves the American Navy fleet. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked an American military base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. However, on November 28, 1941, the U.S. Chief of Naval Operations sent an encoded important warning message via commercial telegraph that warned of an imminent attack from Japan and advised the military to start flying reconnaissance missions to watch out for Japanese fighters that were sent to attack Hawaii. Despite what the message said, Army and Navy planes at Pearl Harbor were not flying reconnaissance, and this didn't escape Japanese attention. This is because that message was received on the 6th of December but wasn't translated until the 8th, one day after the attack. Another message sent on November 24th giving a detailed report of goings-on at Pearl Harbor was not translated until December 16th. As a result, the Navy didn't sail out to meet the Japanese. Everyone was caught by surprise. If the U.S. military had been translating these messages in real time, there's a good chance the Navy fleet would have been deployed to attack the Japanese, but they didn't, and it wasn't, which saved a whole lot of lives. Why? Well, those ships would have confronted the Japanese aircrafts, and as many ships would find out during the war, ships versus aircrafts usually doesn't end well for the ships. At the time, ships just weren't equipped to defend themselves from an air attack. Throughout the war, there would be several more battleships sunk by airplanes, including both of the biggest battleships ever built, the Bismarck and the Yamato. This is why Admiral Chester Nimitz said, "It was God's mercy that our fleet was in Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941. Yes, the fleet was bombed in the attack. 8 ships sank. But there is a huge difference between ships getting sunk in the harbor, where crews were easily rescued, and 6 of the ships saved, versus out in the open ocean, where those same ships would have wound up on the ocean floor, along with 20,000 sailors on board. In reality, the Japanese attack was pretty much a failure. The U.S. ended up losing only 2 battleships, Arizona and Oklahoma. Meanwhile, all the fuel and repair facilities at the base were left untouched, and the Navy could get to work fixing them right away, which is exactly what they did. They were also able to send out the Pacific Fleet submarines fully fueled and stocked within 24 hours of the attack. As for the remaining battleships, they were rebuilt with stuff like fire control radar and dual-purpose secondary armament, making them capable of shooting at airplanes and ships, all because they stayed home on the day of the attack, thanks to the fact that nobody bothered to read their messages. Number 3. The unauthorized invasion of France leads to victory on D-Day. One morning in 1942, the British Lord Louis Mountbatten decided to invade France. 1. This was in the middle of World War II, so France was being occupied by the Nazis, and 2. He did it without bothering to tell anyone on the British side. He literally launched an invasion and didn't bother to let his superiors or just about any of the Allied command know what he was about to do. He ordered thousands of Canadian, British, and American troops to capture the French coastal town of Dieppe and create a beachhead. What could honestly go wrong with this? Since Lord Mountbatten didn't even bother to tell anyone about his plans, the force was sent lacking many things such as proper resources, intelligence, and a proper plan. Generally speaking, disorganized and erratic attacks without any support never really end well, and the Dieppe raid was no exception. To start things off, Mountbatten's plan relied heavily on surprise, of which the British had none since, spoiler alert, the Germans knew they were coming. From the moment the troops hit the beaches, the whole operation was destined for failure. Mountbatten had set his plans up like dominoes. If one thing went wrong, everything else failed. Just minutes after leaving for the beaches, boats began to get disoriented in the early morning darkness. When the Allied troops hit the beaches, they suffered an astonishing yet not surprising loss rate of 73%. A whopping 100% of the equipment, which were the tanks, jeeps, etc., that landed on the beach, were lost. After several hours of fighting, what was left of the Allied troops ran back for the boats, leaving the Nazis with a huge victory, and left Mountbatten as was pretty much the most hated military figure in Canada. It's comforting to know that one's disastrous failure could at least show somebody smarter than how to succeed, and that's exactly what happened here. The disaster of an invasion attempt gave the Allies precious info on how to handle an amphibious invasion in the future, particularly on D-Day. They now knew they'd need a large artillery barrage beforehand. They would also need paratroopers to land behind enemy lines, and a far more flexible plan. It even led to the creation of a special tank just for D-Day after every tank that landed at Dieppe was destroyed. After the war, many military commanders remarked at the importance of the Dieppe invasion toward the victory at D-Day, with Winston Churchill himself saying that Dieppe was an indispensable preliminary to full-scale operations. If you're enjoying this video, then smash the subscribe button. Number 2, Stalin's disaster in Finland helps him beat Hitler. World War II broke out when Germany invaded Poland. 3 months after the invasion, Soviet Russia attacked Finland. The Russians thought it would be easy to capture Finland. You see, Soviet tanks outnumbered Finland's by a ratio of 200 to 1. In aircraft, it was 34 to 1. The Soviets had triple the number of troops. However, the problem was that at the time, most of the Soviet military was kind of a joke of a real army. This was obvious when 6 months after attacking, the overwhelming Russian force suffered as high as 270,000 casualties. More than 3,500 of their tanks were destroyed, and a few hundred aircraft were left in burning chunks of twisted metal at the hands of the tiny Finnish force. Eventually, Stalin decided to settle with the Finns and end the embarrassment they were causing him. Hitler already had his eye on Russia, and he was watching the whole thing. He was just waiting for a sign to see if he could take them on. Stalin's screw-up made Hitler so overconfident that he said, "We have only to kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down." In 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, and sure enough, they made huge gains into the Soviet Union. Hitler's forces were very near Moscow by the time Stalin got his act together, but it turned out the Soviets just needed time to get the production of war materials rolling and for the Russian winter to get going. The Nazis eventually had to retreat until Hitler demanded the city of Stalingrad be held at all costs. That decision ended up costing several 100,000 German men's lives. From that moment on, it was downhill for the Third Reich. Stalin's screw-up in Finland wound up being the perfect bait for his Hitler trap. And number 1, when the British accidentally announced their surprise attack on the evening news. In 1982, Great Britain and Argentina were fighting over a small group of islands off the coast of Argentina called the Falklands. In need of a quick victory, operational planners closed their eyes, took out a map, and to decide where to attack. They selected a town called Goose Green. To prepare, 690 Royal Marines stealthily broke off from the main contingent and moved down to set up the attack. It was all ready to go for May 28th, but then the BBC announced the upcoming attack on their worldwide news, and yes, you guessed it, the Argentinians were watching. The British commander was furious and threatened to sue the BBC for ruining their plan of attack and spoiling their element of surprise. The Argentinian commanders saw the broadcast and concluded that no attack would ever come, under the assumption that only total arrogant idiots would announce their plans via worldwide news service. The British, however, continued with their plans anyway. When the British actually attacked the following day, the Argentinians were caught by an even more complete surprise, and the British easily won the battle, retaking Goose Green and ultimately earning a victory. Click here to watch the next video. Also, please smash the subscribe button, and if you made it this far, click on the like button.